Welcome to Health Service Management 302. Today we're going to be discussing Chapter 3, the Classical Theories of Organization. The classical views of management began in the late 19th and early 20th centuries with what is known as the Industrial Revolution. Factories began to group together into a much bigger scale of operation than ever before. But with the larger factories, there came, as you would imagine, larger government agencies and hospitals and businesses and enterprises, just to name a few. This led to a whole new problem of organizing and managing workers for maximum achievement of goals of such things as efficiency and productivities. We're going to be looking at the two broad categories that Pereira later grouped into what was known as mechanical school and the human relations school. When we think of a mechanical approach, as did Perot, it refers to machines and an emphasis on centralized authority, such as the division of labor and rules. The human relations approach focused on groups of people and emphasized things such as trust in your employer and interpersonal dynamics, to name a few. Taylor's theory noted time and motion studies. And we're going to talk a little bit more about that as we get into the chapter. We are going to briefly be covering in this chapter the main contributions, which are 5 very important approaches to organizational theory. They're known as scientific management, administrative theory, bureaucracy, human relations, and administrative behavior. It's really important to keep in mind that the origin and intent of many of these management practices are still in use today, either in parts or in whole. As we begin to discuss the principles of scientific management, Frederick Taylor is who is famous for this. And in his writings on management, he stated that in the past, man had always been first. But in the future, the system has to be first. And the whole objective is to help the worker achieve maximum productivity and efficiency and then be properly rewarded. So it breaks down that he, as I said earlier, focused on time and motion studies. Through that process, science was used to determine one best way. And scientifically, they wanted to select the best worker. And how they did that, they analyzed to determine who could actually achieve the greatest output. When they were looking to determine the best way, they looked at the individual worker to see they analyzed the task to see who actually achieved the greatest output with less energy and resource utilization. And once the best way was determined and they select the best workers, then they scientifically trained each worker for their job, assuring that all workers follow scientific methods and managers share the responsibility for results. As you read through the text, it talks about how this process is achieved. And from a personal experience from working in a factory at a particular time in my life, they did much the same thing. Actually, I worked in what was called, it was a sewing factory before they exported the garment factories and producing our garments here in the United States. And basically what they did, we had production numbers that were set that we were supposed to be able to sew so many garments a day, with only a certain percentage of them that would come back for not meeting quality control standards, because you had to allow in there for time to go back and do the repair to the garment and still try to meet your productivity. Well, the way they had it set up was if you made or met production, you got an increase of so many cents on the hour. And as an added bonus, you got paid so many cents over and beyond that per garment that you put through that was beyond the production numbers. Say production, I was supposed to set 200 sleeves in 400 sleeves in 200 garments. And I was doing 225. Then I would be paid so many cents for each garment over 200. So let's say I was paid 10 cents more, 10 cents for every extra garment over production, and I put through 25. That gave me an extra $2.50 for the day. Now, guys, I know that does not sound like a whole lot, but you have to understand that that was 40 years ago. So 40 years ago, that was a lot of money. That was a lot of money. Your managers, the managers, were paid extra as well if their employees were being able to put out more production per day than was set. So the managers really looked to ensure that everybody was utilizing the same, that did the same work task. Everybody who set sleeves were doing it, were setting those sleeves with a specific method, that they had specific tools that they used, and that you had the time allowance needed in order to produce that garment and make production. Now, as you can imagine, some people were faster than others, and some people were really fast because, it was a great incentive to be able to make extra money every day. If you could make an extra $30 a week, that was huge 40 years ago. That would be like making $300 extra a week today. But as you can imagine, there was some downfalls to that, because if you begin to make great money each week and making a lot of extra, then somebody was coming around after a couple of weeks and they were doing what was called a time study on the person who was the fastest, that could put out more garments and meet quality control standards. And then before you knew it, within a few days, the production had raised and you were expected to put out more garments per day, then that cut into your extra money. And as you can imagine, that really did create some problems because you always had some trendsetters of people who, was always busting it wide open to make extra money. But on the flip side of that, those people were generally, after a while, if they were just soaring past everyone on the production line, then they would get moved to another area and would start a new job, maybe even running a completely new, different machine. So it would take them a while to learn the method, to learn the operation of the equipment. So it would take them a while to where they could begin to make extra money. And you can see that, sometimes this payment plan was not real successful because it was constantly in a state of change, and people got really upset with that. Now, Taylor, however, based his rates on scientific empirical analysis and measurement that workers felt were fair, and Taylor expected this approach to be embraced by workers and managers alike. And there is a list of the main principles of scientific measurement that Taylor expected the employees and the managers alike to go by. And you can read those out. They are on page 31 and 32. You may be asking yourself, how would this type of management apply in the healthcare field? Well, but it does, because you have got to know the approximate amount of time that it takes to perform tasks, therapies, whatnot, and to do things with your patients so that you can ensure that you have proper staffing within a department or on a floor that takes care of patients. And this did happen in healthcare and still continues on today, where when I was working as a respiratory care practitioner, we had a large management firm come in, and they actually performed time studies on the basic procedures and therapies that we provided. They studied us to see how long it took us to perform those duties based upon the already designated protocol, so to speak, the method in which we were to perform those and the tools that we were using in which to do it. And based upon the time study results, and then based upon the information gathered in regard to the number of procedures that were performed per month or a quarter, however they had it broke down, at that point, then they could determine approximately the amount of staff that each shift should need, which helped to ensure that we were never understaffed or overstaffed within the department. And this was hospital-wide, so it went to every department, every nursing floor. It was studied in surgery, labs, emergency rooms. And as you can imagine, there are variables within those departments and situations that one can have a difficult time studying and factoring in, because you can't predict when those variables are going to occur. So sometimes that did create a bit of a challenge to the management as well as the staff. However, it did help improve projections and enabled us to work on a smaller budget. Some places got a larger budget, but it put things more in line with the way it needed to be to utilize the staff and reduce cost. As the hospital worked on maximizing the utilization of the staff and minimizing the cost to provide services, they used administrative principles. But minimizing the cost of production, whether it be equipment or processes of providing a service, requires an organization to consider some key things such as the relationships and coordination, as well as the possible synergy among tasks, jobs, work units, and departments. Grulich and Urwick developed administrative principles by describing the administrative concepts by including divisions of work, coordination of work, span of control, and unity of boss. And you can read further about that on page 35. And in doing so, they help to build on and correct some of the problems of Taylor's scientific management principles, some flaws that were discovered there. Because remember, this management thing, it is a work and a study in progress. As we, as people, change and things that we deal with, those management styles and techniques are going to constantly be in a revisional state to find better ways of doing things. Excuse me. Grulich and Urwick also helped to form the executive functions by identifying and describing the work of chief executives. And in doing so and asking what type of work do executives perform, they came up with POSDCORB, which is the acronym for planning, organizing, staffing, directing, coordinating, reporting, and budgeting. These 7 functions may be subdivided so that the work is organized and performed by more than one person if necessary. And as one can imagine, when the organization is large, these functions should and are divided among subparts within the organization, because you can have even different departments within the organization that does that, or these things are done within the different departments and different people within the department are responsible for that. Example being, in a department you have your department head or your chief executive manager, and that person has delegated out staffing. Someone like a day shift manager of the nursing unit works on the staffing of the shifts and coordinating with other departments. So that is one example of it. In regard to budgeting, most of the time they are given a budget and maybe one of the assistant managers, and usually it is an assistant manager or an assistant chief executive officer, works on the budget. You're given so much money to work within a, we'll say, quarter, for example, and you have to determine how to spend that money and budget that money out. And that is reported back to your chief executive manager, and then generally that goes before a larger board, depending on how the organization is set up. Now, are there shortcomings to this type of management? Absolutely. But there are shortcomings to any type of management that you are utilizing, because it's not exact. We will move on to the third most important approach to organizational theory, known as the bureaucratic principles. These principles were concurrent with development of their scientific management and administrative principles, and was a work of Max Weber. He strongly believed in the bureaucratic form of organization that included the hierarchical structure, promotion based on merit rather than the personal relationships, interpersonal rules, and other principles of organization. Now, Weber began by identifying three types of authority that you see here. Rationale, which is legal authority, and this is based on the legality of normative rules and on the right of those in authority under those rules to give command. This means the boss can give the commands, and the rules are what he says no matter what. Then you have the traditional, which is your traditional authority, which is based on the sanctity of long-standing traditions and the legitimate status of those who use authority under those traditions. Now, it was thought that these were the most stable for administrative structures because the charismatic leadership was actually based on devotion to exceptional heroism, sanctity, or character of a person, or the normative pattern of that person. Because a charismatic leader sometimes, and most always, eventually over time, loses influence, or it just goes away. So therefore, the rationale of the authority rests on the belief of legality, of patterns, and normative rules, and the rights of those elevated to authority under such rules to issue a command was, ideally your better way to go. Although we've talked about bureaucratic principles and applying that to administration, what is bureaucratic administration? That actually means fundamentally the exercise of control on the basis of knowledge. It's what makes it specifically rational. This includes the technical knowledge that is based for selection in an office. But there's also knowledge from knowing the history and the experience of an organization and having access to knowledge in the office files. And you can read on page 37 about the purest form of exercise legal authority within the bureaucratic administrative staff and its ideal form that follows some basic principles. That's on page 37 and 38. It is believed that the bureaucratic form of organization has precision, unity, continuity, but is ambiguous and is thus technically superior to any other organizational form. That it forms the way of a well-designed machine and is technically superior. And that's how they related it. If you have a machine that works with such great precision and manufactures a large number of output, that is the way you want your systems within organizations that not only encompass people and machines for your maximum management practices. We look at the human relations, which was a catalyst for human relation movement was Hawthorne studies that began in 1924, and they studied how physical working conditions actually affected worker productivity. And the unit of analysis for the human relation approach was often an individual worker or a group. The Hawthorne study helped launch the human relation approach to management. They were trained in listening and interviewing and helped others express themselves. As a result, human relation theory evolved to include the idea that managers needed to pay attention to workers' complaints and warnings that workers were upset about something, though not necessarily what it is they are upset about. This entire process went on, and then Hawthorne's studies and some other work concluded that the work setting of the Industrial Revolution, workers felt a loss of feeling secure. They didn't feel the camaraderie there. There was informal membership and group belonging. Whenever the mechanical processes of new technology and engineered job designs were put into place, workers' social relationships at work changed, and they became very insecure and unstable. But then Bernard advanced the human relations with his writings about his experience as president of N.J. Bell Telephone Company. He believed in hierarchy, authority, and clear formal communication. His views and theories emphasized the cooperative social relationship among humans being within the organization. And he conceptualized organization as systems that were integrated for the cooperative, purposeful efforts of its individual workers. Bernard expressed the need for individuals to cooperate with one another in order to accomplish things they could not do alone, because none of us are self-sufficient. We can accomplish more between the two of us than each one of us can individually. Bernard believed this required that people accept the cooperative purpose and to be willing to cooperate and communicate effectively with others and other people in the cooperative unit. Those three conditions were the necessary and sufficient conditions to have an organization, and they actually became the basis for Bernard's theory of formal organization, which has placed an importance on the informal organization and extensive communication throughout the organization. He provided us in detail about the conditions necessary to have effective communication with authority and leadership, and that these approaches create interpersonal relationships, cohesiveness, and motivation for workers to stay and work toward the organization's overall purpose, their goals. When you have that type of relationship, you have a tendency to rally together, work together as a team, even if you have to stay late in order to accomplish the job. I saw this a lot in the hospitals when we work together as teams. Whether it be someone who was facing a personal challenge that needed help, we all rallied together and helped that person to meet their needs or their goals and to be able to move forward. Or if we had a bad patient that needed extensive teamwork where we all worked together and stayed and did whatever needed to be done in an effort to help this patient recover and have the best possible outcomes as a result of our efforts. And no matter what, humane leadership and fair treatment of your employees was a really vital aspect of Bernard's work, and we all know that from our own personal experience. You know, if we're working for somebody and we feel like that they have great leadership and they treat us fairly, you know, we're going to do and go beyond the call of duty, so to speak, in order to meet the objective or the goal that that supervisor has laid out there for us. So keep in mind, with the human relations, according to Bernard, we need to have cooperative relations. We have a need for social behavior, moral motivators, understanding the roles of the informal organization, communications throughout the organizations, and fair treatment for all employees. We now look at the administrative behavior by Simon, who was really skeptical of some of the earlier organizational theories, and he actually went in and dissected the other four administrative principles and showed how they contradict themselves in some of the situations. And actually, once Simon was finished dissecting the four administrative principles, none of them actually survived very well. He assumed that man was limited in his ability to identify and evaluate alternatives and was settling for an acceptable choice solution rather than a best solution or decision. Theorizing administrative behavior by the administrative man rather than economic behaviors by the economic man. He also believed man had limited ability to obtain all the necessary information by identifying all the appropriate alternatives, objectively determine consequences, and rationally evaluate choices. Human beings instead had bounded realities. Remember, we talked about bounded realities in over in the anatomy and physiology section, chapter 1. But these human beings being bound within bounded realities are due to only being able to and capable of mentally processing a limited amount of information. Because when you are involved in a situation, you can only evaluate and make a recommendation based upon your own personal experience or exposure to that particular situation. Another aspect of Simon's theory of hierarchical goals is that when one level means where a lower level ends. Let me repeat that. A second aspect of Simon's theory of hierarchical goals in which one level's means were a lower level's end, meaning that the work performed at the lowest level within the organization was just a means to accomplish the end purpose of the second most lowest level, whose work was just a means by which to achieve the end purpose of the higher level of the organization, which means it works up or it works down. This means ends relationships that are among organizational levels guided the decisions made by each worker. Work unit, department, division, so that the divisions are made at one level, and that this would help achieve the end purpose to the next level. This process and approach to decision making are necessary because of people's bounded realities or limited cognitive abilities. Organizations sets rules, have premises, and boundaries in which decisions are made. So administrative theory is particularly the theory of intended and bounded realities of the behavior of the human being who suffice because they have not the wit to maximize. A person's reality is limited by a triangle of three factors: mental habits, abilities, skills, and speed, values and motive, and knowledge of the immediate problem and to how to make a decision. And all of these factors are going to vary from person to person over time and the various situations. Taylor, Simon, and the Human Relations School focused largely on individual workers. And the human relation approach, excuse me, focus on the individual. And they included studies of such things as leadership, job redefinition, participatory decision making, motivation, and morale. That concludes the lecture for Chapter 3. I want you to look over the review discussion questions that are at the end of the chapter. Make sure you have read the chapter in its entirety and that you are ready to discuss the discussion questions, and begin reading Chapter 4, which we will start on at the latter part of the class on Wednesday. Have a great day, everybody.